The wine glass exploded against the marble floor. Laughter erupted through the restaurant like gunfire. And Isabella Park, 21, daughter of privilege and cruelty, poured the remaining burgundy liquid directly onto Gracia's white blouse. The room fell into shocked silence. Gracia stood paralyzed, humiliation burning through her veins as phones rose like weapons to document her shame. And from the corner booth shrouded in shadows, a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit rose to his feet with deadly grace. Every conversation died. Every breath held. Because everyone in the Golden Pearl knew exactly who he was. Kang, the Korean Mafia boss who controlled the city's underworld with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. Then, turning to the girl who had just destroyed a woman's dignity, he said with terrifying calm, "You will apologize. And you will mean every word." The evening had started like any other Tuesday night at the Golden Pearl, one of Seoul's most prestigious restaurants where the wealthy came to see and be seen. For Gracia Santos, 28, it was just another shift in a long series of shifts that stretched back 5 years. 5 years of smiling through condescension, of pretending she couldn't hear the whispered comments about her accent, of accepting that she was invisible except when someone needed their water refilled. She moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and precise. The restaurant smelled of truffle oil, aged wine and money, so much money it seemed to permeate the very air. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, where conversations were conducted in hushed tones and every gesture carried the weight of status. Gracia had learned to navigate this world by making herself small, by anticipating needs before they were voiced, by never, ever drawing attention to herself. She belonged here only in the way that furniture belonged, necessary but unremarkable, present but easily forgotten. At the far end of the restaurant, in a booth positioned to observe everything while remaining somewhat apart, sat 5 men. They came every Tuesday without fail, arriving at precisely 8 o'clock and departing at precisely 10. They were always impeccably dressed, their watches alone worth more than Gracia's annual salary. They spoke in Korean, their conversations too low for her to hear even when she approached with their drinks. But she felt them watching. Always watching. The man at the center never spoke to her directly. He would gesture slightly and one of his companions would relay his order. His eyes, when they landed on her, were dark and unreadable, containing depths she didn't want to explore. The others called him Malchin, though never loudly, never with anything less than absolute respect. Gracia had learned not to ask questions. She brought their drinks, always whiskey, always neat, always the most expensive bottle in the house. She cleared their plates when they finished, refilled glasses when they were half empty, and accepted the generous tips they left without meeting anyone's eyes. It was safer that way. That night everything changed. The door opened with a flourish, and the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. 6 young people swept in like a storm front, their laughter too loud, their movements too dramatic, their entire presence designed to command attention. They wore the latest designer fashions like armor, their jewelry catching the light with every calculated gesture. At the center of the group was Isabella Park, 21 years old and radiating the particular brand of cruelty that came from never hearing the word no. She was beautiful in the way of marble statues, perfect and cold, with eyes that assessed everything and everyone with casual contempt. Her father was a member of the National Assembly, her mother a former beauty queen who had married into political power. Isabella had been raised to believe the world existed to serve her whims. The Golden Pearl wasn't exclusive enough for her usual haunts, which was precisely why she'd come. She wanted to be the most important person in the room, wanted to feel the weight of lesser people's envy and admiration. And if the restaurant wasn't impressive enough, she would make it memorable through sheer force of personality. They chose the table near the window, the one that offered maximum visibility to both the dining room and the street outside. Isabella snapped her fingers without looking, the gesture so dismissive it made Gracia's stomach clench even before she started walking. She approached with her notepad, her professional smile carefully arranged. "Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Pearl. What can I start you with tonight?" Isabella barely glanced at her. "Champagne. Dom Perignon. The 2008 vintage. And don't take forever about it." Gracia kept her voice level and polite. "Of course. May I see identification for everyone at the table?" The air around the table changed instantly, crackling with hostility. Isabella's eyes snapped up, her expression transforming from bored indifference to sharp anger. "What did you just say?" "It's restaurant policy," Gracia explained gently, though her heart was already racing. "For alcohol service, I need to verify that all guests are of legal drinking age." Isabella stood slowly, deliberately, her chair scraping against the floor in a way that made nearby diners look over. Do you have any idea who I am? One of the boys at the table already had his phone out, angle adjusted to capture everything. Gracia recognized the setup. She'd seen it before, though never directed at her. These weren't just wealthy kids having dinner. They were influencers, content creators, people who documented their lives for millions of followers and measured their worth in likes and shares. I understand, Gracia said, keeping her tone respectful, but I still need to follow the law. My job requires it. Your job, Isabella repeated, her voice dripping with venom. Let's talk about your job, shall we? She gestured expansively at Gracia's uniform. You're what, 25? 30? Still serving tables like you couldn't manage anything better. Tell me, is this what you dreamed about when you were a little girl? Bringing rich people their food and hoping for tips. The laughter from her friends cut like glass. Gracia forced herself to remain calm, to not let the words penetrate. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. I'll be happy to bring you any non-alcoholic beverages from our menu, she said quietly. Isabella's smile was cruel and calculated. You know what I think? I think you're jealous. You look at people like us and you realize how pathetic your life is. You're a nobody. A servant. You'll always be a servant because you're not capable of being anything more. The words found their target, burrowing under Gracia's professional armor to the vulnerable places she tried so hard to protect. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notepad. I'll give you a moment to review the menu. She turned to walk away, desperate for distance, for the sanctuary of the kitchen where she could breathe without being watched. Just keep moving, she told herself. Don't cry. Don't give them the satisfaction. She'd taken maybe 3 steps when she felt it, liquid, cold and wet, soaking through her uniform from behind. Before we dive deeper into this story, click the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. If this story moves you, share it with someone who loves a good tale. Do not forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. The sharp tang of wine filled her nostrils. For a moment she couldn't process what had happened. Then the laughter exploded around her, and she understood with horrible clarity. Isabella had thrown her wine. The entire restaurant froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Cutlery stilled against plates. Even the soft background music seemed to fade into horrified silence. Gracia stood there, wine dripping down her back, staining her white blouse purple, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Oh no, Isabella said with mock concern, her phone capturing every second. I'm so clumsy. But don't worry, wine stains add character. You probably needed an upgrade anyway. More laughter, though it sounded uncertain now. Even Isabella's friends seemed to sense they'd crossed a line, though none of them would dare say it. Nearby diners stared at their plates, uncomfortable witnesses to cruelty they wouldn't interrupt. Gracia felt hot tears threatening. 1,000 responses crowded her throat, anger, hurt, humiliation, all fighting for dominance. But she was still at work. She still needed this job. She still had rent due and bills to pay and a sister back in the Philippines who depended on the money she sent home every month. So she stood there, silent and frozen, while her dignity bled out onto the expensive carpet. And then she heard it, the deliberate scrape of a chair against floor. The sound was low and purposeful, cutting through the silence like a blade. From the shadowed corner booth, Kang rose to his feet with the fluid grace of a predator. He wasn't tall by dramatic standards, but his presence filled the room instantly. Every eye turned to him, drawn by something beyond physical size, an aura of controlled violence, of power so absolute it didn't need to be announced. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Gracia's entire wardrobe, tailored to perfection. His hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and dark intensity. But it was his eyes that stopped hearts, black and utterly cold, containing the kind of emptiness that came from seeing too much death and causing most of it. The 4 men at his table remained seated, but their postures shifted subtly. Hands moved closer to jacket interiors. Eyes scanned the room for threats. They were ready for violence in the way that breathing was ready for air, instinctive and inevitable. Mcsame walked toward Gracia with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the silence. The teenagers fell quiet immediately, Isabella's smile faltering as she recognized something in his approach that her privilege couldn't protect her from. He stopped beside Gracia, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. For a long moment he didn't speak. He simply looked at her, his eyes taking in the wine-stained uniform, the tears she was fighting to contain, the way she'd made herself small in a futile attempt to disappear. His jaw clenched once, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Then he reached for a napkin from the nearest table, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire restaurant with the weight of absolute authority. Hold still. It wasn't a request. It was a command that bypassed Gracia's conscious thought and went straight to her body. She froze as he gently turned her, dabbing at the wine on her shoulder with surprising care. The gesture was intimate in a way that made the entire room hold its breath. When he finished, Mcsame turned to face Isabella's table. The napkin, stained purple, hung from his hand like a flag of war. "You," he said, his voice still quiet but laced with something that made grown men in the restaurant shift uncomfortably, "will apologize." Isabella's face had gone pale, but she rallied with the desperate bravado of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "I don't know who you think you are, but—" Kang, one of her friends whispered urgently, the name escaping like a prayer or a curse. "Oh God, that's Kang." The blood drained from Isabella's face completely. Her phone, still recording, trembled in her hand. Everyone in Seoul's upper circles knew that name, knew what it meant, knew the stories that circulated in whispers about the man who controlled territory from Gangnam to Itaewon, who moved product and money and people with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, who had never been touched by law enforcement because he owned half the police force and had dirt on the other half. Mcsame stepped closer to Isabella's table, and she flinched backward instinctively. "You threw wine on a woman who was doing her job," he said, his voice still that terrifying quiet. "You humiliated her in front of everyone here because you could, because you thought there would be no consequences for your cruelty." I didn't mean," Isabella stammered. "You meant every word," Mcsame interrupted. "You recorded it for your followers. You wanted them to see you destroy someone you considered beneath you." He leaned down, his face level with hers. "Apologize. No. And make it sincere because I will know if you're lying." His men hadn't moved from their booth, but the threat was implicit in every breath. The restaurant had become a pressure cooker, violence simmering just beneath the surface of civility. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face now, her carefully applied makeup running in black streaks. "Louder," Mcsame commanded. "So everyone can hear you." "I'm sorry." Isabella's voice cracked, genuine fear finally breaking through her entitled shell. "I'm sorry for what I did. It was wrong. I'm so sorry." Mcsame straightened, his expression unchanged. "Now leave. All of you. And delete that video or I will make sure every person in Seoul knows exactly what kind of family the Parks really are." They scrambled to their feet, grabbing phones and bags with shaking hands. Isabella was crying openly now, her friends supporting her as they rushed toward the exit. The door chimes seemed to mock their hasty retreat. Silence descended again, heavier and stranger than before. Slowly, almost reluctantly, conversations resumed at a murmur. Gracia stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Mcsame turned back to her, and the coldness in his eyes softened fractionally. "Are you all right?" She tried to answer, but her voice wouldn't work. She nodded instead, a jerky movement that felt disconnected from her body. "Good," he said. Then, so quietly that only she could hear, "No one touches you again. Ever." The certainty in his voice bypassed all logic and reason, settling into her chest like an anchor. He wasn't making a promise. He was stating a fact about how the universe would operate from this moment forward. He walked back to his booth, pulled several bills from his wallet, far more than their meal cost, and placed them on the table. Then he left without another word, his men falling into formation behind him like a military unit. When the black Mercedes outside pulled away from the curb, the restaurant seemed to exhale collectively. "Did that just happen?" someone whispered. "That was Kang," another voice answered, awed and terrified in equal measure. "That poor girl. She's either the luckiest person in Seoul or the most doomed." Gracia stood in the center of the dining room, the wine-stained napkin still in her hand, her entire body shaking with delayed shock. The manager appeared at her elbow, his face pale and drawn. "Go home," he said quietly. "Take the rest of the week off. But we'll handle everything here." She wanted to argue, she needed the money, couldn't afford to miss shifts, but her legs were already moving toward the staff room, toward her locker, toward escape. As she changed out of her stained uniform, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked different somehow, wider, more aware, like she'd woken up from a long sleep and was seeing the world clearly for the first time. Outside, rain had started to fall, a light mist that made the streetlights blur and glow. Gracia pulled her jacket tighter and started walking toward the subway station, her mind still spinning through everything that had happened. She didn't notice the black Mercedes idling at the corner, engine running, headlights dimmed. Didn't see the way the rear window had been lowered just enough for someone inside to watch her walk away. Inside the car, Kang sat in silence, his eyes tracking Gracia's movement down the street. His second-in-command, a man named Taeyong, glanced at him with barely concealed curiosity. Should we follow her home? Make sure she's safe. Already arranged, Malchin said quietly. 2 men rotating shifts. They'll keep distance but maintain coverage. Boss, Taeyong said carefully, with respect, this is unusual for you. She's just a waitress who got caught in a bad situation. Malchin's jaw tightened. She's not just anything. And what happened tonight was my fault. How is entitled rich kids being cruel your fault? Because I've been going to that restaurant every week for 6 months, Malchin said. Watching her work. Seeing how they treat her. And I did nothing. I let it happen because it wasn't my business. He paused. Tonight, I made it my business. Taeyong wisely said nothing. He'd worked for Malchin for 8 years, long enough to recognize when his boss had made a decision that couldn't be argued with. Long enough to know that whatever happened next would reshape everything. Find out everything about her, Malchin ordered. Family, finances, why she's in Seoul, what she needs. I want a full report by morning. Everything was a word that meant something specific in their world. It meant surveillance, background checks, financial records, social connections, vulnerabilities, and leverage points. It meant learning a person inside and out, mapping every aspect of their life. Usually, it was preparation for recruitment or elimination. This time, Taeyong suspected, it was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. The rain picked up as Gracia descended into the subway station, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving after the soft glow of the restaurant. She found a seat in the corner of the car, pulled her phone from her bag and stared at the screen without really seeing it. 3 missed calls from her sister in Manila. A dozen texts from coworkers asking if she was okay, if the video was real, if she knew who the man was who defended her. Video. Right. Of course there was video. Everything was always recorded now, every moment of joy or humiliation preserved forever in digital amber. She opened social media with trembling fingers and immediately wished she hadn't. The video was everywhere. Isabella throwing wine, Gracia's frozen reaction, and then Kang rising from his seat like an avenging angel. The comments were a mix of support and warning. That waitress is so brave for standing up to Isabella. Does she know who Kang is? She's in danger now. The way he looked at her, that's not just protection, that's possession. She's either going to end up dead or married to the Mafia. No in between. Gracia closed the app, her stomach churning. What had she gotten herself into? She hadn't asked for his help, hadn't wanted to be noticed by someone like him. She just wanted to do her job, earn her paycheck and go home. But the way he'd looked at her, like she mattered, like her humiliation had genuinely angered him, like he would burn down the world to prevent anyone from hurting her again, that look had branded itself into her memory. Nobody had ever looked at her that way before. The subway lurched to a stop at her station. She stepped out onto the platform, exhaustion settling into her bones like lead. The walk to her tiny apartment took 15 minutes through rain-slicked streets, past closed shops and sleeping buildings. She didn't see the black sedan that followed at a distance, or the man inside who reported her safe arrival into a phone before driving away. Inside her apartment, barely more than a room with a bathroom and a hot plate, Gracia finally allowed herself to fall apart. She stood in the shower, letting hot water mix with tears, washing away wine and humiliation and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. When she finally crawled into bed, still damp and exhausted, sleep came quickly. But her dreams were filled with dark eyes and quiet voices, with the feeling of being seen for the first time in her life, with the terrible knowledge that everything had changed and could never be changed back. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, Kang stood in his study, reading the preliminary report Taeyong had compiled in record time. Gracia Santos. I am 28 years old. Filipino immigrant on a work visa. Sent 60% of her income home to Manila to support a younger sister's university education. Lived alone in Mapo district. No romantic relationships. No criminal record. No debts beyond a small student loan from nursing school she'd never finished. She'd been in Seoul for 5 years, working at the Golden Pearl for 3 of them. Before that, she'd been at 2 other restaurants, leaving both for reasons related to harassment, verbal from customers, physical from a manager at the second place. She was invisible to the world, working herself to exhaustion for a sister who dreamed of becoming a doctor. Mcsame set the file down and poured himself a whiskey, staring out at the glittering city lights. He'd built an empire on reading people, on understanding their weaknesses and leveraging them for advantage. But standing in that restaurant tonight, watching tears threaten in Gracia's eyes while she maintained her composure, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage at the casual cruelty of people who'd never known consequences. And underneath the rage, something more dangerous. Recognition. He'd grown up in poverty, his mother cleaning houses for families like the Parks, coming home exhausted and defeated every night. He'd watched her accept abuse because she had no choice, because fighting back meant losing the job that kept them fed and housed. He'd promised himself that when he had power, he'd never let anyone treat people that way again. But somewhere along the path from street enforcer to organization leader, he'd lost sight of that promise. He'd become so focused on territory and profit that he'd forgotten the people those things were supposed to protect. Tonight, Gracia had reminded him. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to Taeyang, increase her salary. Anonymously. Make it look like a restaurant bonus. And make sure no one at the Golden Pearl ever disrespects her again. The response came immediately, already done. Also, the Park family is reaching out. They want to meet. Mcshame's expression hardened. Of course they did. Isabella's father would be scrambling to contain the damage, to protect his political image. He'd probably try to pay Gracia off, threaten her, make the whole thing disappear. He typed back, tell them I'll consider a meeting. After they issue a public apology. They won't do that. Then we have nothing to discuss. Mcsame finished his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. Tomorrow he'd have to decide how involved he wanted to get in Gracia's life. The smart play was to maintain distance, ensure her safety from afar, let her return to normal. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in that restaurant, wine dripping down her back, maintaining her dignity in the face of cruelty designed to break her. He saw strength that most of his men didn't possess, courage that had nothing to do with guns or violence. And he knew, with the certainty that had guided every major decision in his life, that distance wasn't an option anymore. Gracia Santos had become his responsibility the moment he'd stood up from that booth. Now he just had to figure out how to protect her from his world while pulling her deeper into it. Because in his experience, the two were impossible to separate. The next morning, Gracia woke to her phone buzzing with notifications. For a moment, she considered ignoring them, pulling the covers over her head and pretending the previous night had been a nightmare. But reality was persistent and demanding. She checked her messages, her stomach sinking with each one. From the restaurant manager, your schedule has been adjusted. Reduced hours, better shifts. Performance bonus deposited to your account. From her sister, OMG you're famous. But also, who is that man? Is he really Mafia? Are you okay? From an unknown number, Miss Santos, this is Taeyang representing Mr. Kang. He wanted to ensure you're recovering well from last night's incident. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. The last message included a phone number that Gracia knew she shouldn't save but did anyway. She checked her bank account and nearly dropped her phone. There was an extra month's salary showing as a performance bonus, though she'd done nothing to earn it beyond surviving humiliation. This had Mcshame's fingerprints all over it. Gracia sat on the edge of her bed, torn between gratitude and unease. She didn't want to be in anyone's debt, especially not someone whose protection came with implications she couldn't begin to understand. But she also couldn't deny the relief flooding through her at the financial breathing room, at not having to worry about making rent this month, at being able to send extra money home to her sister. Her phone rang, her sister calling via video chat. Gracia answered, and Maria's face filled the screen, eyes wide with concern and excitement. Tell me everything. Maria demanded. Are you okay? That video is everywhere. Some people are saying you're brave, others are saying you're in danger. There are literally forums discussing whether Kang is going to kill you or marry you. Neither, Gracia said firmly, though her voice lacked conviction. He just helped me out. That's all. That's not all. Grace, do you know who he is? I looked him up. He's not just some businessman. I know what he is, Gracia interrupted quietly. I'm not stupid. Maria's expression softened. I know you're not. I'm just worried. Men like that don't do things without expecting something in return. He hasn't asked for anything. Yet. The word hung between them, heavy with implications. Gracia wanted to argue, wanted to believe that Mcshame's intervention had been purely altruistic. But she'd lived in Seoul long enough to know that nothing was free, especially protection from powerful men. "I'll be careful," she promised. "Call me if anything weird happens." "Promise?" "Promise." After they disconnected, Gracia forced herself to shower and dress, to make coffee and toast, to go through the motions of normal life. She wasn't scheduled to work for 3 days. The manager's message had been clear about that, so she had time to figure out what happened next. But what she wanted and what the universe had planned were rarely aligned. The knock on her door came at precisely 10 a.m. Gracia looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, holding a large box. "Miss Santos?" the woman called. "I have a delivery." Against her better judgment, Gracia opened the door. The woman smiled politely and handed over the box, which was surprisingly light. "From Mr. Kang," the woman said. "He wanted to make sure you had something appropriate for when you return to work." Before Gracia could respond, the woman bowed slightly and walked away, disappearing down the stairs with efficient speed. Gracia carried the box inside and set it on her small table, staring at it like it might explode. Finally, curiosity won over caution. She lifted the lid and gasped. Inside was a complete set of work attire, blouses, slacks, even new shoes, all in her exact size, all clearly expensive but professional rather than flashy. There was also a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. "You deserve to feel comfortable at work. This isn't a gift with strings. It's an apology for not intervening sooner. MK." Gracia's hands trembled as she touched the soft fabric of one blouse. No one had ever bought her clothes before, had paid attention to what she needed rather than what they wanted from her. This should have felt invasive, and part of it did. The fact that he knew her size, knew her schedule, knew where she lived, all of it pointed to surveillance that should have terrified her. But underneath the unease was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to being cared for, to matter to someone beyond her utility as a server or a source of income. She was folding the clothes back into the box when her phone rang again. A known number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. "Hello? Miss Santos." The voice was male, smooth, and vaguely threatening in a way that made her spine stiffen. "My name is Robert Chin. I'm representing the Park family." Gracia's blood ran cold. "I don't want any trouble." "Neither do we," Chin said smoothly. "Which is why we'd like to offer you compensation for last night's unfortunate incident. Perhaps if you were to post something clarifying that the situation was exaggerated, that Mississippi Park has already apologized privately." "She hasn't." Pause. "Well, we can arrange that. And along with the apology, we're prepared to offer 200 million won as compensation for your distress." Gracia's mind reeled. 200 million won was life-changing money. Money that could transform everything. "I don't want your money," she heard herself say. "Miss Santos, please be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. What happened last night was recorded. The truth is already out there. I'm not going to help you rewrite it." Chen's voice hardened. "You should think very carefully about making enemies of the Park family. Your work visa, for example, comes up for renewal soon, doesn't it?" The threat was clear, hanging in the air like poison gas. Before Gracia could respond, another voice came through the line, deeper, colder, infinitely more dangerous. "Chin." It was Mal Chin, somehow on the same call. "You have 3 seconds to apologize to Miss Santos and hang up before I demonstrate exactly what happens to people who threaten those under my protection." Dead silence. "1, Mal Chin said quietly. "Mr. Kang, this is just a business conversation." 2. "I apologize, Miss Santos. Sincerely, I." The line went dead. Gracia stared at her phone in shock. How had Mal Chin known about the call? How had he patched himself in? Her phone rang again immediately. She answered without thinking. "Are you all right?" Mal Chin asked, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. "How did you?" "Your phone is being monitored. For your safety," he added quickly. "I needed to know if the Parks would try to reach you." "You're tapping my phone?" Gracia demanded, anger flaring. "Protect your communications," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" she shot back. "You're watching me, tracking me, monitoring my calls. How is that protection and not just another form of control?" Silence stretched between them. She could hear him breathing, could sense him choosing his words with unusual care. "You're right," he said finally. "This is excessive. But the Parks won't stop with one phone call. They're going to come after you, your job, your visa, your family. They'll make your life hell because you refuse to be complicit in covering up their daughter's behavior. And you're different?" "Yes," he said simply. Because I'm asking for permission instead of assuming I have the right.